Travis. Thank you, Travis.
You're welcome.
All right.
Let me close this.
Yeah, that's probably good. All right. I know we talked about this briefly back in February, but we never really had much of a chance to get into it more. So that's what we're hoping to do today, and then into the new year, get into it a little more. But so just to recap, the Urban Forest Master Plan had some specific recommendations. One was to refine tree protections by zoning category, creating separate provisions for large developments. Another was to expand mitigation fees to consider value, such as appraisal, using appraisal methods. One was to provide more oversight for utility permits for trimming and removal within easements and right-of-way. One was to make the tree fund spending more flexible. Better coordination between the DRB and the Tree Protection Board, and relocating utilities underground, which is kind of outside the ordinance, the tree protection ordinance per se, but another recommendation.
Included in that would be reinstituting the tree fund to apply to residential.
Right, and I think that's part of making it more flexible, yeah. And so in February, when we talked, a couple things that y'all touched on were making mitigation more based on canopy percentage, and not automatically exempting if they're dead, disease, or dying, so that we help maintain our overall canopy. Further define dead, disease, or dying. We talked about having a ratio to allow for more understory plantings, building more of a natural forest relationship with the canopy trees, so it's not just all canopy trees. But and then we talked about marking building corners in the field for site visits for ease of y'all better able to evaluate. And then some things that have come up since then, just us dealing with it, and this is more, some of this is more towards the landscaping requirements, but consider eliminating 5 and 7 gallon size for shrubs, because apparently they don't really make that size in the landscaping world. So 3 gallon is pretty much the size you can get, and even if you get a 5 gallon, it's still a 3 gallon size plant. It's just in a 5 gallon pot. And potentially increasing the number and changing it to 3 gallons. Expanding on the language regarding property damage, better defining what we mean by property damage, like do driveways, are driveways considered, or that type of thing. And then one thing that has been requested by a council member is, I know we kind of used to have, I won't say it was automatic approval if the tree was in 10 feet, but it was much more consideration if a tree was very close to a building, within 10 feet of a building. Our one council member wants to bring that back, where it's basically automatic approval if it's within 10 feet. So that's something we need to discuss. So that's kind of just the overview of where we were and where we've been. And then honestly, this is supposed to just be an open discussion with y'all. We don't really have anything specifically planned. It's more just to get a better understanding of ways that you think this could be improved, this ordinance could be improved, and ways that it could be, your role could be more effective in utilizing and enforcing ordinance. So,
well, I have specifics in mind. These are much more general, all-encompassing points that you brought up. So I don't know how we dovetail them together in a good discussion. I have just a couple of things that are just paramount on my mind, just things that have happened in the past. But we have to put words on it somehow in the ordinance, and that is the damage, property damage. We got blindsided on that Longleaf Pine, that time when Nathaniel Rice, went in the last minute, oh, by the way, you know, we read the, had, Jeremy read the ordinance, and, you know, right there in the last part, part of the sentence was, you know, the usual things, and also property damage. Well, this is property damage, and, you know, we sort of spun off wheel, I did in my mind anyhow, but it was almost like, you know, that was the whole part, and we had to let that one go. But I continue to remember your example of Coach's Live Oak. And, because this was not a special retreat, but there needs to be some degree of you know, of driveway damage that can be tolerated, and alternative approaches to it. The big problem is that all these HOAs have all these rules about, you know, impervious driveways, solid concrete or asphalt driveways, and it's hard to get around that.
I think a lot of times the homeowner just says that to y'all, and that's not necessarily the case.
We checked once in Pine Forest.
I mean, some of them, yeah, of course, they're not going to, but there's also alternatives to gravel.
But we could check with y'all to see, is this true, that this HOA?
I mean, we would have to reach out to the HOA because we don't have, I mean, some of the newer developments have development agreements or covenants that state specifically, you know, you have to have this type of driveway. I think they're few and far between that get that detailed. Or there are some that we just have working knowledge of that, yeah, they're not gonna let you do this, but off the top of my head, I can't think of one that would automatically say no, so, or that I've heard that from. Jesse, would it be possible to have, I know this doesn't apply to driveways, but a lot of times we have like foundation damage as a reason for removal. Would it be possible to involve like one of the building inspectors to come out and take a look at it? I mean, I know like they're not gonna provide like a professional evaluation or anything in writing, but at least maybe we could have something that like it's subject to inspection of building staff to confirm that the damage is actually related.
We can ask.
I don't know, I just think it might.
Yeah, we get a lot like that where it's, you know, someone just points to a crack, you know, that's over here, and the tree root's over here, you know, and the foundation's being challenged. Then there's other times when it's been blatantly obvious, and but there's all the stuff in between, and that's what this is all about.
I mean, rather than putting the onus on the applicant to hire a third-party inspector, which would be really expensive.
We asked them to do that with arborists to come in and.
True. I'm just thinking of ways that we can.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Get more information without causing more frustration.
Yes.
That's always good, right?
It's unfortunate that people will not somehow don't tell you the truth. And I hate to go in being suspicious of everyone, but at the same time, we've had a number of cases where this is true. You know, so it's all like when trees got to come down, it's got pine forest. When we look at it, and we've maybe smarter than they think we are, and it's a woodpecker. Oh, not a pine forest. So I wish we didn't have to deal with somebody that's going to try to pull the wool over our eyes, because we're there to help.
I think a lot of times with homeowners, it's just a lack of understanding. They don't know all of the things that we know. So it's just, they're just going off of what they see, and, you know.
So following up on your suggestion, and I'm not disagreeing, I'm just discussing here. If someone from engineering were to come out and say, what are they going to say?
So if there's a crack in the foundation, if they come out and they look at it, there are other signs of settling, or, you know, maybe there's a grade difference on the property that they can point to and say, that's clearly a result of settling over time because there's a 2-foot grade difference in your property.
Okay.
And this is this type of foundation, like if it's a brick foundation or they have a crawl space, they can at least speak to that. Not that, I mean, I know you're familiar with all that sort of stuff, but it just might help with the process if you have someone there who can speak to them in those terms and point out to them that it's clearly the building, a result of something with the building rather than the tree. They might not be able to say, yes, the tree is not like an issue at all. They might not be able to exclude the tree, but at least they can say, this is clearly from the building.
Right, no, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
That if we're not asked, we don't want to be asking an engineer to make a judgment.
No, it wouldn't be someone like who's a structural engineer. Our building inspectors are just, I mean, they review based on code, but they're familiar with seeing the problems that are a result of poor construction or weathering over time. And it might not be something that you ask the inspector to do every time, but if it's a situation where you guys feel like you don't have enough evidence and maybe they're not, in that situation, do you guys usually have who comes to assess that, if anyone?
We haven't been voting on that.
Right. We've been
I'm
running.
saying, but like, who would they reach out to? Like, who do you advise them to reach out to assess that?
An engineer,
Okay.
or, I mean,
Or
which person?
Like a home inspector?
I mean, in certain situations too, they could do excavating around.
Yeah, well, that's gonna be very successful.
That's what I'm getting at, that's the difference that I want to make sure we understand. What Becca's saying is, seems to me absolutely right, if there's a crack, if there's already a crack in the foundation, but someone, an inspector or an engineer could look at it, could come to the site and say, oh, but wait a minute, I'm seeing, you know, as she says, settling over here, so it may well be that as opposed to this tree root, you know, 10 feet down the road, down the way. That makes good sense. What we don't want is for an engineer, and I've worked with engineers a lot, and a lot of engineers think they know more than they do about structure, and they would say, well, it's definitely the tree root, and I wouldn't want an engineer to make that determination. If they would stay in their field and look, the arborist, that's all I was getting.
So maybe it's something where it's not independent of your site visit. Maybe it's, you know, we coordinate with one of our building inspectors and say, Sterling, can you meet us at this property? Or
absolutely, yeah.
That way you both are there.
I think it's great. It's a great idea.
Rather than them just going out there independently, telling the homeowner one thing,
Right.
it gets lost in translation, and they come back and say, well, they told me it was because of the tree, and now we're getting conflicting information. So I agree with you, yeah.
Yeah, and they wouldn't necessarily, it's always better if we can hear what someone else says, but if they at least would meet with Justin, and that way you don't have to wait on us.
Right.
And we don't have to hold the applicant for another meeting.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And that's pretty easily able to do that. You got engineers that can kind of go out just whenever.
Yeah, I mean, we meet with other department staff on
Okay.
projects all the time.
But if we've, are you happy with that approach?
Yeah,
Okay, I just,
oh, yeah.
so if we're ready to leave that,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's something we could do now, that doesn't really require an ordinance change, that's more of a policy,
Right.
or, you know, decision by y'all in terms of how you wanna handle issues when it's a potential foundation damage by a tree.
yeah. I'm
But in terms of, adding more to the ordinance regarding property damage, you know, that's something we can,
How does this read?
that's what I'm going to, so.
Could you also do that for driveways too?
Yeah, I mean, those are kind of more strict, there's only a few things that,
Could possibly.
yeah.
So basically says, the trees should be removed or dead disease, irreparably damaged, hazardous, or clearly causing damage to the property or injury to person in the opinion of a certified arborist. So that's, I mean, that's how it reads.
So
It says clearly causing damage to the property or injury to person, in the opinion of a certified.
What page is that?
That is page 122.
But doesn't that kind of negate someone just saying, look, it's damaging my property? They have to have a letter from a certified arborist saying it is.
Well, I mean,
Is that the issue?
certified arborist, but it just says clearly causing damage to the property or injury to a person in the opinion of a certified arborist. So I mean, Justin could be the certified arborist, Amy could be the certified arborist, they could hire a certified arborist.
Mhm.
I mean,
Which is what's
depends.
happened.
Yeah, I mean, generally, it just depends, obviously.
So the issue is that we've had independent arborists of you guys saying it's causing damage and y'all disagree.
And that's what happened to us in this one meeting in particular, is that the consulting arborist knew the ordinance better than we did. And perhaps that's our fault, but he.
I think their issue is, yes, something could clearly causing damage, I mean, something could be breaking up a driveway, but is that a reason to remove a tree entirely if there's alternative methods of fixing the driveway and keeping the tree?
We had alternative methods, but somehow it just, that thing just sort of floated away, didn't it?
Well, it did because he challenged us and we didn't know, the ordinance to argue them. But what we learned, and this may combat that, what we learned after that is that we as the board can
Have some
determine that the arborist do further studies, which is what we could have done then, is that now this is an expense, an extra expense to the applicant, and we need to determine how much more we want to do that. But we, in this particular instance, could have hired someone to excavate around that tree root to see if it could have been root pruned and then put in a root barrier without damaging the concrete and well, I mean, without damaging the tree. And following up on what Becca's talking about, there is, if we had someone who understands concrete engineering, concrete, based upon articles that I've read throughout the years, concrete has an active life of about 30 years. And after that, it begins to deteriorate and lose its structural stability. And so if the driveway is over 30 years old, it may not be the tree's fault, it may be the weak concrete. But then that would take an engineer to determine that. And then, I guess, does the town want to push applicants that far? Because this can become, I think that how a structural engineer and.
Right, and one, I think that may be part of, what we're talking about, maybe adding some additional language regarding property damage and determining the extent caused by the tree and whether any available alternatives exist that would not damage the tree further, and also would be within reasonable expense for the applicant.
Right.
So I mean, I think we can maybe put that into the ordinance, and that's how you know if council is willing for the town to go that far, and if they're willing to have that in the ordinance or not. You know, obviously, if a tree is right up on a driveway and, you know, the actual base of the tree is what's causing the driveway to buckle, and, you know, there's not much you can do about that. You know, you can't shave off the base of the tree.
This one
That's
was far enough
cause-
away that there was a solution.
Right, so I think that's where you look at whether there are reasonable alternatives to removing the tree. So I mean, that's language we can look at adding in there where it talks about property damage.
Particularly driveways as opposed to foundations and framing and all the rest of that, where it's a little bit more significant, you know, the driveway, you know, is a passing thing.
Driveways, just, you know, pretty thin concrete usually, yes, it's not a.
So there are some industry standards for root pruning. I don't know if we want to be specific with the wording or even, you know, stating two best practices or industry standards as far as root pruning. I mean, we've all read the technical reports on what you can and can't get away with it.
Right.
You know, there's a margin there.
Honestly, it is generally good to include something that is an industry standard in your ordinance to help support what you're asking for.
So I mean, and I think it was the top of my head, it was 3 times the diameter of the tree. Was the,
If it was on one side,
if it was on one
5
side,
times the diameter of the
Right.
tree.
Yeah.
If it was the entire root system being challenged.
right,
And the problem with that is that those are written, with a big safety factor.
right.
It's a major safety. 5 times the diameter of the tree is just not necessary. And truthfully, there are times when 3 times is not necessary. And the literature, I don't know what ISA is gonna say, but the literature from what we referenced was a tree, technical paper. And they say in there, this is not, this is the standard, but there are times when you can deviate. And as we've all seen, you can come right up to the side to the trunk of the tree and cut it, depending on species and depending on what's gonna happen. So if it's better to include, well, if we include literature citations, then we should know that we're gonna limit ourselves. But maybe we need to.
Yeah, I mean, I think likely to get full support of the council and also to have support should something ever get to a lawsuit level. I think having those literature, the industry standards, the literature to support what you've, determined is good.
Well, forgive me for being devil's advocate here.
No,
Understand that limits the town, for instance, and if it wants to do some root pruning to accommodate a sidewalk, I would, now, unless it's different for public property versus private property, it could limit that. And so I think we just need to be aware, unless there's a way to put in a caveat of some kind, unless it's, that there's a way that some expert could say, no, this can be done in this instance because of these reasons, species, percolation, whatever, whatever. And maybe it's not possible. And maybe for the public, it's better to have the standards. I don't know.
I mean, could you say, you need to follow these specs unless approved, unless you want to, unless it's approved by the town arborist to cut, a little closer or cut more or something like that. Just follow these specs unless otherwise approved by the town arborist.
Or the tree board.
The tree board, or both.
Or, yeah, the town arborist and tree board. If that'll work.
I think potentially, some things that we do is, normally you don't want to encroach as much. However, if you include a tree care plan for treatment before, during, and after what you're doing, then we could, that ability is increased as to what you can do.
Right.
Whereas if you just left it alone, you didn't cut it cleanly, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, yes, it's gonna cause more irreparable harm to the tree. So, so I think we can include some type of caveat for going beyond the standards in certain circumstances. Sometimes could be for the public good, whether it's a sidewalk, or someone really wants to save their tree type of thing, or it's a very more of a heritage type tree where it's of importance to the community,
Right.
Type of thing.
Driveways, concrete driveways are not always the same thickness sometimes. Is that true?
What, is there a standard?
There's generally a standard for at least new ones, but people don't always follow it.
Right.
Yeah.
If those get inspected, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, I think it's usually like.
As long as they're finished, they didn't mess up the sidewalk, engineers passing it, so.
But, yes, there's a standard.
There's a standard, but.
I think it's usually like 4 inches, but,
And is it reinforced?
no.
No,
there's no rebar. No, there's no rebar in a driveway.
I hope not.
But it
At
is.
least with a mesh. The only reason I'm asking is that if we were talking about insisting that an engineer look at it, that makes a difference in the engineer's decision. But maybe I mean this.
I would say unless, it's something like specifically built for like an emergency access or something like that, generally it's not gonna have any type of reinforcement. So.
Kind of every angle.
That's fine, you're good.
Yeah, maybe I should have found that a lot, so never mind.
And I think this kind of, that what we just talked about kind of gets into, the preservation during construction. So right now, we talk about, where, in number 5, under 8.3.3, on page 124. Thank you. It talks about where grading within a tree drip line cannot be avoided, cut and fill shall be limited to 1/4 to 1/3 of the area within the drip line. Tree roots must be pruned with clean cuts at the edge of the disturbed area, and no fill shall be placed within the drip line of a tree without venting to allow air and water to reach the roots. So basically what we're doing right now is if they're encroaching no more than 1/3 into the tree line, we're actually, we usually do the tree protection area, that 1 foot per inch, 1 foot radius per inch DBH. Then Justin will approve it at staff level if they have a tree care plan. If it's beyond the 1/3, it has to come to y'all. That's obviously not specified in here, it's more of a policy thing. Right now, it just says you can't do that. So I don't know if we should be putting that in writing in the ordinance. I think we probably should, if that's what we're doing.
Can we also add something saying that every avenue has been taken? Because a lot of times they just go straight to the 3rd. Like they're like, well, it's no more than a 3rd, but it's more so with residential where I'd be like going back and forth with the homeowner saying you have plenty of room to put this somewhere else. But they would cite that as, well, it's not more than a 3rd, so I should be able to put it there. And I mean, I know it says cannot be avoided, which is what I would point them to, but I feel like it needs to be more strongly worded as it relates to that.
Kind of what it says regarding like removal of grand trees during construction, where it says wherever.
No, it says we're grading within a.
No, I'm talking about like add something like it says where it talks about removal of grand trees in chapter 13, where it talks about.
I don't think you need to add it somewhere else. I would just add it.
No, I'm saying the language. That's what the language you're looking for.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
It says.
So you're saying they just automatically go into the 1/3 and just not even trying to do a 1/4?
Or just arguing that, well, this is where I want it, so, but it's avoidable if you have other places to put a structure.
Yeah, I mean, we have, in the case of residential lots, every measure should first be explored to preserve existing trees, including the reconfiguration of the building and or driving parking areas around the tree.
Okay.
That's the type of language you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but if it's already there, then I guess.
Well, no, that's removal of a grant.
I see what you're saying. Gotcha. And then if they want to pursue that location or encroachment, then Justin wasn't comfortable with it, then it would go to y'all.
People are just going for the 3 feet. 1/3 rather because.
We get all
it's
sorts
raining.
of numbers, like a lot of people, like Jesse was saying, the 10-foot thing,
Well, I
that was
was
on the
gonna say,
pamphlet.
They saw that pamphlet
Mhm.
and,
They
and
remember
then
it.
just try and hold it.
And I mean, you can find, like, if you Google stuff now, like, Google keeps everything forever, so like old tree removal applications are on the
Really,
internet and information like that, and it's not just specific to the tree ordinance, it's with a lot of things that people reference old requirements, but.
So the way that you word, that you would consider wording that gives the tree board the opportunity to grant an acceptance?
Yes, y'all, if it's beyond the 1/3 encroachment,
Okay.
it gives y'all the opportunity to grant an exception.
I just, there are certainly.
It's what we're doing currently,
Right.
rather than just saying, no, you can't do this at all.
Okay.
but you gotta have a tree care plan.
Well, and right now, we're requiring the tree care plan, no matter whether it's approved at staff level or, if it's more than, just a very minimal encroachment into the tree protection area, we are requiring the tree care plan. It's just, if it's over 1/3, y'all are gonna have to approve it and review that tree care plan to make sure you're.
And I mean, I have sent tree care plans back for, lack of an actual plan, lack of care. So the tree care plans are reviewed for consistency to make sure they're gonna address the issues that we want them to address. Cutting clean roots, anti-growth hormone, situations like that.
And this is for if you can
This is-
encroach 1/3 of the,
During construction.
during construction, but if it's 1/3 for, an eighth of the diameter.
So it's looking at so if it's, say it's a 20-inch tree.
Right.
And so your tree protection zone is gonna be a radius of 20 feet all the way around the tree. So what we've been getting, particularly on larger construction projects, making them show that full tree protection zone and then show the area of encroachment and calculate what that percentage is. So they're having to calculate to show that they're either less than a 1/3, so less than 33% encroachment within that entire tree protection area.
Okay, so the whole area of the.
The entire circle.
Okay.
And they have to show that they're less than 33% encroachment. If they're less than that, then Justin can review their tree care plan and approve it if he feels it's sufficient. If it's more than that, then it is coming to y'all.
That's good, not many people do feel that extent, that's great.
And I mean, it's something that engineers can easily do.
Yeah.
It's not tough for them to calculate that. It's just actually.
No, that's good.
Getting them to do it. But we've done that particularly on a couple of the newer subdivisions that have some larger significant trees, which was, y'all looked at a couple of those actually.
Yeah, I remember being rather impressed with the plans that showed all that and.
Well, and admittedly, those are plans we get after like 4 reviews. I'm like, nope, you're gonna have to give us a little more information here. So,
And they finally did.
but then the next time around, when they get to the next stage, generally they do have the
They got it.
information. Yeah, they're not stupid. They know to include that to start with. Well, most of them know to include that to start with. I won't say all. It depends on whether they've had personnel changes, that type of stuff too. But, is there anything else with tree protection during construction y'all think needs to be addressed? Obviously, we have an issue with capacity and checking that they keep their tree protection up.
We don't have the detail in the ordinance.
No, it's in our development manual. Don't really have, but we send, we have it, we send it. We send it to everybody. Unfortunately, that's just a capacity issue. That's not.
Sure.
And when Justin sees it, or we see it, we do go out and address it, but,
Can we change the chain link thing?
we've got 22 square miles of
That
town.
we want,
area. It's hard to
Sure.
chain link.
ensure. What was your question?
I said, can we remove the thing about us town staff not being allowed to require them to use chain link? Walter Bailey isn't on council.
He's not, but honestly, I mean, we still, say you can use chain link or you can use 2x4s,
Right.
and those are really the two options we provide unless they have come up with something else that Justin deems is adequate. So I mean, it's not really prohibiting us from requiring proper tree.
I haven't had a lot of pushback with that.
I just don't like it.
No, I mean, if I were to do it myself, I would be putting up the 2x4 railings with the top and bottom posts, but it gives people an option.
Yeah, I remember when that came to pass.
I think it was more of an issue when it was got so expensive. It was, and they were saying it was more expensive than the chain link, and we were like, just do chain link.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carol Nixon said that, right?
Well, and I mean, we always say, if you have another option you think will work, just let us know and we'll
Yeah.
verify whether we think it's adequate or not. So.
Right.
But anything else y'all have seen in terms of tree protection that needs to be addressed?
Well, aside from having it thrown so they can back the truck around, that kind of.
Aside from actually enforcing it with,
There is
staff
a
letters.
bright light in the future for an enforcement person, right?
Yes, if I ever have time to write the job description and get it advertised and interview people, yes.
Well, I just really good news that
Yes.
they went ahead and approved
They did
that.
approve it.
I wasn't even aware of it until I think you told me. So that's great.
Yes.
I guess I see a lot of stuff knocked down and taken down, but I can't even know the fine points that.
And again, if you see it, just let Justin know.
Yeah,
It's
I can
just,
always go out.
us not being able to be everywhere all the time. So if you see it, let us know and we'll address it.
Why are we
We've done that
seeing orange
multiple times.
things again?
In the town of Somerville?
Yeah.
And it's nothing that I've approved. I haven't approved it. If they do put orange stuff up, I make them at least
Yeah.
put 2x4.
I was gonna say, sometimes you'll see it outside of, there's generally 2x4s behind it.
There's a few lingering projects that are going on right now that they had been allowed to use some combination of that. I can think of like one or two, but those were
Yeah.
previously
Now that you
approved.
mentioned that, the one that's at 5 points there, that was
Yeah.
like a combination of, there was some.
He did
Orange
he did it at 500
Right.
South Main
Right.
too, and so Nick just
And that's-
said, okay, because, yeah.
That's been addressed in emails to them, so we're trying to keep it consistent with, sticking to those two, wooden fence or. chain
Well,
link
he's
fence.
he's a local right in town here, he's the right thing, right?
Yeah,
Mr. Taylor, right?
he's aware of the requirements.
He said he's gonna do better this year.
So in regards to, if there's nothing else, with that, I think, obviously the tree fund, getting it back to where, it can be used in any situation, not just for larger developments. And then also, I know we talked about making it more flexible as to what the actual funds from the tree fund can be used for, so that it's not just, planting new trees, but perhaps maintenance of existing public trees or that sort of thing. So I've got those notes already.
Let's see, I had a question about that. Should there be any talk of having a set number per inch, like a set price per inch for trees, instead of having them provide a quote, 3-inch caliber trees, should we? I mean, do you think that's just so everything's standard and quick?
So,
It's not as much of the process, like, based on current industry, the nursery bid standards.
we can,
How is that done now?
so they're required to give us a quote from a nursery for the cost of the tree and for planting it.
Mhm.
So it's, and I mean,
We review the quote.
we review it to make sure it looks like it's valid.
But it does vary from
Sure.
place to place.
And obviously, a larger developer that's buying a lot of trees gets a better deal than,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
a single person. So I mean, we could do it, and that's one thing, I mean, that was one thing they talked about in their Forest Master Plan was expanding mitigation fees to consider value, so actual appraisal methods of what a tree was worth and basing mitigation on that.
Right.
Now, I think that would likely only be for certain size and flood trees. I don't think we would do that for every tree, but I think we do need maybe some feedback from y'all on when that should perhaps be considered.
Can we back up?
Yes, we can back up.
But can we back up just half a step?
Yeah.
And that is it too punitive to ask an applicant to supply three quotes? And the town will take the average of the three? Because if you're gonna do a job other than, if I'm gonna landscape my yard, I'm gonna get 3 bids.
Mhm.
I mean, I just am, because the bids are free.
Mhm.
Right, I
And
mean,
you do a tree by phone.
sure, yeah.
Maybe it is, I didn't know if that solved the problem.
Right, it's worth considering, I think we do, the quotes that come in, like Jesse was saying, we do review them for some consistency, so we're not.
No, if y'all were happy with them, then I just thought you weren't happy with them.
I personally haven't dealt with any issues looking at quotes,
Yeah, I mean, I think Justin's was maybe just to make it more streamlined
right,
for all applicants.
Okay.
And not, basically, I mean, because by getting the quote, you're actually kind of giving larger developers a better deal because they're able to get a better quote than someone,
Right.
which again, if we reinstate it for homeowners, than someone who's just asking, for a nursery to give them a quote as a homeowner, they're obviously gonna pay more because they're not buying a whole bunch of trees all the time. So they're not getting a quote from someone they work with on a regular basis.
No, if y'all are happy, I just.
So I don't know, I think what Justin was talking about was perhaps doing a, dollar amount per inch of mitigation.
But doesn't that change? That would be.
so that depends on what type of appraisal we're looking at the standard appraisal, I think it's the sales comparison approach where you're taking the diameter size and then you're saying how many 3-inch caliper trees would it cost to replace this, so if it's let's just for an example, say a 9-inch tree, it would take 3-inch caliper trees. So we would get a quote for 3-inch caliper trees. So what I was saying is, should we have a price per inch? So say it's 9 inches and we want them to replace it, it would, let's just say $150 per inch. That would be, we would get that number by taking an average of what it would cost to replace the tree.
Right. And that'll work for the day.
I'm just thinking
that market's.
if it becomes a residential thing, it might be, the process will happen more frequently. It was just that, it's an idea worth considering to streamline the process.
I guess I was sort of ignorant, why do you demand the quotes from the bids?
So if they're paying into the tree fund, that's what it currently requires is to get a market value
Okay.
of what it would actually cost to plant the tree, to purchase the trees and plant them.
Okay, that's
So
okay.
that's what the quote is for. And so that's what they pay into the tree fund.
Well, okay, I didn't get that far.
And we haven't I don't know if you have in the past, but I know there's other appraisal methods, whether we use the trunk technique, that's what you kind of touched on, depending on the tree. And that this, if it's a specimen tree, sure, maybe using a different technique to come up with a, cost analysis of the tree.
Right, and harkening back to what we talked about before, what is ISA today recommending for heritage type trees? Because ISA years ago tried to stay away from anything but replacement because it was so arbitrary, you would get challenged in court much easier.
Sure, there's a lot of variables that go into the tree formula technique.
And so what that forced you to do was to get a landscape appraisal done by a certified landscape appraiser. I like that method, because you get a lot more money for it, but I just thought it is challengeable, or it used to be challengeable. I don't know if it's still considered that way or not.
I could easily see it being challengeable because you take a lot of things into consideration, and some of those things are subjective.
But I'm clear, if you use the replacement method, and let's say someone cuts down without permission a 60-inch live oak. Right? So if you go with the largest, you can go with the largest that's available, the largest that's available locally. That can be up to 6 inches. And so then so if you do that, purchase a 6-inch tree plus planting, plus most people recommend 2 years of maintenance after the water, mulch, and all that sort of stuff. And so if you use what would I say, a 6-inch tree, that's 10 of those that you've got to do. So you're looking at $20,000 or more, whatever it might be. Actually, if you do maintenance, it's more, and water is more than that. And that is sustainable in a court. That is not quite the same. It's not as good as the landscape appraisal method, but it's something that's back.
I personally think it's acceptable, considering now we don't even have the option of paying into the tree fund for residential.
Right.
And the citation is $1,000.
Right.
Accident, and to keep people out of the court system too, it's always better to give back with planting trees than writing citations.
Right. It's just, that's one way to approach it, and
Yeah, I agree with you.
So, I mean, currently our ordinance states just 3-inch caliper, so you're talking about.
well, you can do that, but even, but that's it, even if you just do 3, you're still, what's a 3-inch install good for today?
I think it's generally around 400 to 500, depending
Well,
on.
let's say it's 500, and if it was a 3-inch tree, and it was so it would be 20 times 500, was that 10,000? That's a hefty cost. Now, a big developer may not care, but $10,000 plus if you're able to add the 2 years maintenance. Now, I don't know if you can or not.
Yeah, so the reason, I mean, we don't really talk about the maintenance, Yeah, the 100% of the total cost to plant the balance of trees that were unable to be planted to satisfy the site density requirement or recompense tree requirements. So the fee will be based on the current market value of 3-inch caliper trees installed to American Association of Nursing Standards. We used to have the whole, we had 1 year maintenance in there. It's just hard to, I mean,
I got you.
It's hard to verify if that's accurate or, or is it, if someone had irrigation, then, what's the, so we did take that out because we were advised that it was difficult to verify what the maintenance cost would be.
Well, that's the other thing, if you include the maintenance in there, and you don't know if it's being done properly or not, and the tree dies, what about a replacement cost on that tree? You gotta kind of think about that too, and I know this kind of keeps going on and on and on.
Right, so, I mean, are y'all good with what we have in there, or should we look at appraisals, or, and maybe just do some research to see how other folks handle it?
I think that.
Okay.
I think that it'd be unfair to ask, well, I guess you could find time in your day to do an appraisal, but you probably have to get certified. You have to get the
I was gonna say, we do have the book that tells you how to properly do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that before.
Oh, yeah, me too, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I have to look at the formula to do it.
Right. Well, if you call Walter Batto, he's gonna look at the formula too.
Yeah.
And he is certified. So you could contract for it. Or they could pay to send you out to San Francisco to take the test. The city wouldn't send me, that's why I'm not licensed.
Never too late.
That means I have to go back to work.
Okay, we can research how.
Yeah, that's what I would.
Other folks do it and kind of come back with some options to consider. And so that kind of goes, I think that a big part is looking at our current preservation standards and mitigation standards and how those are applied for existing properties and new development. Because I know one of the things that I know y'all hear a lot and that we heard a lot when we did the urban forest master plan, public input, was everybody felt like existing properties were treated much stricter than new construction projects in terms of tree removal. Of course, most people have no idea what new construction projects, the extent of the process they go through to get approval, but
Also context, when you're looking at a 0.29 lot versus.
yeah, but so I know we've had, like I said, one thing that was discussed back in February was, doing mitigation more based on a canopy percentage per lot rather than on, only mitigating healthy trees or only mitigate, so that you try to maintain your overall percentage in town rather than just mitigating for healthy or, now, again, I don't know if the council will go for that, but, it's something we could certainly look at. I know a lot of places do it based on canopy percentage. Now, that is somewhat more difficult to determine, requires, more of an analysis of more than just a tree survey. You need drip lines and all of that. So it does make it a little more of an onus on the property owner and the surveyors, honestly, to get that information. Now, it can certainly be done.
So it can't be done by Google Earth.
We could potentially, our GIS, administrator asked me, he's like, is there anything for me to come up today? I'm like, no, don't worry about it, but no, we actually could.
And I'm not suggesting that you should.
But yes, I mean, there is that potential, yes. You can certainly use Google Earth. I think the issue is a lot of times those images are taken in the winter, and so it's difficult to see the true canopy coverage of a lot based on that. So it's hard to say whether.
But they fly, every 2 years?
So we actually have a service called Nearmap that we utilize that we may actually have a winter and a summer.
January and May.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there is, so we could utilize that. It obviously requires a little more work on our end to verify the canopy. And then I think the difficulty is, okay, so this tree comes out, what percentage of the canopy are you removing with that tree? How do you verify that without knowing the drip line of the tree and the drip line of the other trees to determine was there overlap, was it,
I think that question is for y'all to determine.
Oh, yeah.
Can you do it, can you not? And if you can't, if you just say, well, or maybe we need to wait a few years so they give us 10 more people.
I like your optimism. Based off of documentation that.
What's that?
Would we be verifying that based off of documentation that they're providing? We'd be figuring out.
Either that or we would use just like we do with impervious surface, where, sometimes we use it based on what they're providing and sometimes we have to utilize what we have and how.
Can any
verify
certified surveyor
do the drip line?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do that. That's what we require, like the Shoemaker tract that's being developed down on Dorchester Road has, 19-inch live oaks, but their drip line is 60 feet away. So when we go out and look at it, we're like, oh yeah, you're gonna have to provide us the drip line. Just the size of the tree isn't adequate because it's not taking into account the actual drip line of the tree. And so they had surveyors go out and actually show the full drip line of the tree so we could determine, what we needed there. So, I mean, yes, that's something surveyors can do.
Is
So
it possible to demand that in certain instances, but not every instance?
That's what I was
Yeah.
going to ask, like for an individual property owner, if you're building a new house, I mean, you have to have a survey anyway,
So you
but
can
for
just get them
these-
to add the.
Right, but for these ones where we're doing accessory dwelling units, or which I know we're starting to move towards requiring the same for a residence, but, like an addition, or if someone's doing a shed and they have to remove, like, we're not gonna go that far with that, are we?
No, I wouldn't think
Okay.
so. But I think, again, it's probably gonna take us researching how other places handle and use canopy percentage, and maybe contacting them to see how they've enforced that, how they're calculating it, what they found to be the best way to handle that. And if it's something they're happy with, or they wish they didn't have it that way
Right.
to begin with. I'm pretty sure, I know the city of Decatur and Georgia uses canopy percentage. I'm pretty sure Greenville switched.
Somebody has just recently switched. Has Charleston not switched?
I'm not
I'm
sure.
not sure.
I thought Aaron told me they had switched, but
I thought Greenville switched
They-
when they did their recent tree ordinance.
then they have. Because you talked to Drew, didn't you?
Yeah, I think they switched. I didn't have a whole lot of time to talk to Drew, so we kind of just, I didn't have a chance to ask him a lot of questions, but I think they recently switched. But we can find
Yeah,
out
find out
how
if
to
you
do
will.
it.
Yeah, I'm happy to call some folks too if you need me.
Okay.
You know, just let me know. That, but that's good if you can do it in some instances like that one and not overburden the property owner.
Right.
Which, well, maybe we haven't finished that yet.
Calculated.
Am I talking too much? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was making sure I
I was looking in my pockets to see if I'd taken some speed, but I.
Don't give the secrets away.
I won't give you Just something that would be good, and I don't expect you to, don't feel obligated and tell a lot, but isn't it good for, let's how to say this? When individual property owners, residents complain about, the developers getting more leeway, and you mentioned all the hoops they have to jump through to get there. When we consider that, I mean, shouldn't we also consider the value that development is bringing to the town, building roads and all that? But it should have, or maybe it should have, from a planner's perspective, should that be part of our view or no?
I mean, yes, I mean, it's something that has to, yeah, it's something that has to be considered, you can't just, yes, look at it in a vacuum. And people say, well, they get to cut down, I'm like, well, likely when your house was built, you cut down a lot of trees too,
That's
it's
right.
just grown back.
That's right.
They've had a chance to grow back and, that type of thing. Now, I mean, there are some neighborhoods where, we were much more strict and, each lot had to submit a plan with the trees and trees got saved that honestly now they're going back and taking out because their trees were saved, 3 feet from the house and it's
In trouble.
causing issues or the trees have died so it's there's pluses and minuses. And I mean, one thing that I know, Bill always said, and that Nick started to realize, and I think Justin feels this way in certain instances too, is a lot of times it's better to take out trees that have been in a forest that are not used to being on their own, to remove them and replant healthy trees that are actually gonna thrive, rather than try to keep spindly forest trees that, particularly if they're on their own. If it's a grouping, that's different, but that are on their own, that are basically not gonna do well to begin with, that you're gonna have to replace probably in 5 to 10 years anyway, whereas that new tree would have had time to grow within that span and actually provide more benefits. So that is something that we take into account when we review them at staff level, particularly the smaller trees that are 8 to 16 inches.
Right.
and even the grand trees when we're looking at development sites, because Justin has the ability to approve those if there's really no working around them, or if they're poor quality, which is why we do require, evaluation of green trees, on development sites. So they do have to have them graded, in terms of their quality and condition.
Yeah.
So, which I know is helpful for y'all.
Yeah.
Those projects, which I don't know that we actually have written down either, so we may want to actually add that in writing to our ordinance about grading, grand trees on development sites.
It's done a matter of course now, right?
Oh yeah, it's definitely policy and nobody pushes back on it, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to actually have.
No,
it written
probably
down.
not, because then there'll be the one,
Yes,
right?
Well, I'm certainly hopeful that you'll be able to, the council will accept going back to the, using the tree bank or tree fund for residential properties.
I hope so as well, and I think honestly, it provides those residents more flexibility. It doesn't really hurt.
It's gonna make it easier for
Yeah,
us
it
to approve of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, it just is. Cause this juncture, I'm opposed to that 10-foot rule. I mean, it depends on species. If you've got a live as opposed to a mulberry, or a camphor.
We've had a lot of close calls with the 10-foot thing, and Kenny and David were pretty strong on 10-foot rule. But I went many visits where we did not approve trees that were closer than that, just because of the nature of the way the tree was growing, its current age, which is old, and there's no challenging going on yet, unlikely to happen. So we've had a fair number of.
Yeah, and I tried to explain that to the council member, and I was like, well, it honestly depends on the type of tree, where it's planted, what type of soil it's planted in, what type of foundation the house has.
Right.
If it's a crawl space, there's a lot less concern, than if it's a slab foundation.
Yeah.
That type of thing. So I tried to explain that there are things you need to consider. Like you shouldn't just have an automatic approval.
Right.
So it was something that was asked to be included. I don't know if there's maybe wording we can add in there to,
If there is, I don't think it should be a numerical thing, it should be proximity based, because I just think having that number is.
yeah, people assume, yeah.
You never went away, actually.
And they tried that to be that there is no remedy, because there are many trees that you could root prune, especially if you got crawl space.
Mhm.
If it's a slab, then it's much harder. But
Yeah. So what kind of pushback does this represent, council member? I mean, is this whole document gonna go to the administrator before it even gets to council?
So what I was hoping to do was take everything we've talked about today and that we talked about previously and basically do some research, and come back with some, basically like a red line ordinance to show potential changes and maybe a couple options on some of the sections in terms of what we've discussed researching, and then meet with y'all again to get your feedback, and then it would technically go through the ordinance approval process for amendments. Now I would like to get some public feedback as well. I'm not sure the best way to do that. I mean, obviously I know just our normal public hearing is not the best way to do that.
Get Chris to do a survey.
Yeah, but I don't know how a survey, I mean,
What specific information are you looking for?
you like our ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I can maybe talk to Drew about, because I know Greenville had a lot of public input when they changed theirs. So, maybe discussing with him what methods they used, or whether, it was him, or I don't know if it was someone in the planning department that technically spearheaded that, but what methods they used to get, quality feedback, from folks,
Right.
so. So, that's,
Yeah, I'll leave it, y'all figure that out. I gotta get them. That's a tough one. Do people generally come to the things and then?
Not
Just complain later?
yeah, basically. Rather try to avoid the complaining later part,
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
so. But,
Well,
and I know we'll need to reach out to developers as well, to get feedback from them.
and maybe we can help to get people to a public hearing. When you're ready, one of us could write a letter to the General Assembly.
Okay.
Talking about rather than putting, that's the town will prefer to do it, rather than put the town as in the hot seat, we could do it and say this is a good thing for citizens to do.
Sounds like a good job for an English major.
So the developers won't be as affected as much by the things that we've discussed as will be the private residents, right?
Correct, I mean, if we're talking about changing how mitigation is done and that type of things, it could potentially affect developers, but I mean, yes, a lot of what we said is trying to make things clearer and more straightforward for property owners, so they know what to expect and what's needed.
But regarding development, we did talk about, and you mentioned in your preliminary comments that we had asked that developments be flagged so that we could see the building footprints when we're in the field. If that's not a burden on people, it really helps us to see
Yeah,
it.
I've been preaching that for a while.
It's so hard to go to a wooded site and just envision it. It is for me, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, I don't know that we necessarily need to put in the ordinance, but that's something we can require as a policy. If you're going before the tree protection board, you need to mark out your property
I mean,
corners.
some of them are complicated, some of these office buildings and everything's not, it's not gonna be four corners. But an overall outline, particularly one that implies which trees are definitely gonna be planted and cut down.
Right.
So that just reminded me of one of the issues we talked about, on when the Green Drive popped up its head. You remember that one?
I do, yeah.
19 Lagrange.
19 degree, when the house plan was written in stone and they were not gonna move it, and you brought that up in the thing, you wrote that it's very expensive to change a plan, they claim that. And you pointed out that there's plenty of places for 5,000 square foot house on this property, and they don't have to take out those live oaks. But that was a difficult one to decide, because is that too much to ask to spend $20,000 to change a house plan? I don't know. That thing was sort of railroaded through, and but I personally did, I personally believed that, and you dug up the absolute numbers. And what it would cost to redesign, a house and architect's fees and all the rest of that, and
Well, we deal with that a lot. I mean, with all different types of projects where, I mean, a developer would be stupid to not approach us first before putting that much
Well, I
money
think
into
it's
design. It's more individual property owners.
than it
Right.
is developers.
oh, yes. Well,
But the same thing applies, I mean, it's even written in the ordinance about meeting with staff before submitting things, and It's just that they don't, that can be anyone's argument, even if they are aware that they should have come and talked to us first or looked at what the parameters for the lot were first. If they just went ahead and if they can rely on, well, I didn't know and now I've spent this money, so now you're causing the problem for me and I have to spend more money. I feel like that's never gonna go away. But I feel like we've had fewer cases of that because we've been able to push back.
I think we've done a better job of requiring.
Before it even gets to y'all.
Yeah,
Right.
requiring the tree survey at the very beginning of, before they,
Right, well, that's great.
and folks, I think, seem to be a little more knowledgeable about things, about what's required and at least recently. So hopefully, we don't have that quite as often. I know we had talked about better coordination between DRB and Tree Protection Board, and we have focused on that with our policy of having at least, and I know it's somewhat difficult for y'all, but having them come to y'all conceptually first before submitting to DRB to gauge whether there are some trees that are kind of non-negotiable, like you're gonna need to save these trees, so that when they design their site, and go to DRB, they're already taking those trees into account.
Yeah, that seems to be working.
So I hope that's been better since we focus more on that.
Do they come to us before DRB? No.
So it depends on the site. So at TRC, we've been trying to focus on whether there are a lot of, good quality trees on the site. And if there are, then that's when we try to make sure it comes to y'all first before, if not necessarily before it goes to DRB, at least before it goes to DRB for any approvals.
Right.
Like it may have gone conceptually to DRB, but it hasn't gone to them for any approvals. Because conceptually for DRB, they just give feedback, they don't give approvals. And so having it go conceptually before both boards, before any type of approvals are made, and that way we feel like they're more willing to work around or consider trees in that instance.
Can we prohibit them from requesting final DRB approval if they have been going through the tree protection board process? If they haven't received approval from y'all for their plan? So it's like the Parker's Kitchen, they got final DRB approval, but they still hadn't finished with y'all. And I just feel like that's kind of like cart before the horse sort of situation. Because if DRB has approved their plan, it's a moot point. Because that's a vested approval. It ties your hands for making any changes to it because.
Well, and I mean, it depends on the situation. If it's come before y'all and you're generally good with certain trees being saved and they submit to DRB and those are shown to be saved, that's one thing. If it's something where there's been argument over which trees are to be saved and y'all haven't provided a final, haven't provided kind of a, not final approval, but at least some type of, we're generally good as long as you work around these trees, then I think that's more of a policy thing.
Yeah, I suppose we kind of did that with the flex space on Central with that 49-inch oak that they wanted to relocate.
Mm-hmm.
And then pushing them about not allowing any encroachment.
Right, so I think it's more of a policy thing where we just have to be, and we are much more aware now where it is in the process between both, just because.
That was great, Central, they just dropped the building out of there.
So I think, yes, we can certainly.
That's what I've been pushing for.
Policy-wise, not allow final approval until the trees are worked out.
Will that be a difficult thing if we put it in print to have the corners marked?
What, corners marked thing, I feel like we can just send that out with the.
I was gonna say, we don't really even have a site visit in print in terms of y'all doing site visits. That's a policy thing so I don't know how we would we would have to add
Okay.
that in, and then, so I think, you know, we can, Justin
Yeah, we
can make
can-
sure,
Right, and I have tried to do that, and as you know, some do it, and
Yes.
probably most of them don't, but we can be a little more.
I mean, we can let them know that if, you know, if the corners aren't marked, then the tree
Right.
protection board's not gonna review the site, and you're not gonna
So
move
we can-
forward. So I think that's a way to
Right.
get them to do it.
We could proceed that way, if you
yeah.
know.
It shouldn't take to hold them up, man, that's wrong. You out.
Losing money by the Yeah, exactly.
I really wouldn't.
It was a lot.
I know y'all aren't necessarily as familiar with our landscaping requirements, but I don't know if y'all had any.
I have one question on the landscape requirements. I know you say 3 gallon for trees or 3 gallon plants. Sometimes, you know, you see 3 gallon plants come in and they're way undersized, even though they're 3 gallons. Can you put in there some kind of minimum size on the plant or something like that?
I feel like some of them we do, trying to see if it's. So like some of them, we have evergreen shrubs planted a minimum 6 feet on center and a minimum of 3 feet in height at time of planting.
Okay.
But in other areas, it's not specified, so, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but that's something we've told, like, if they put in plants, where, yeah, it may, and usually we don't even see the gallon.
Right, yeah.
So, but he's told them, like, they'll put in plants, he goes, yeah, no, that's not big enough, you're gonna have to.
Okay, all right.
So it's, you know, it's something that we have been able to do. And I know one thing, and this was, I think, more Nick's thing about the understory plantings to create more of a natural landscape, but I don't know where y'all think that might best be included. You know, currently right now, we just require canopy trees. We used to require canopy and understory, and we got complaints that it was too crowded, like
Right,
neither
yeah.
tree was doing well because there were so many trees in the buffer or border areas. So, I mean, one thing we do allow, like, is should it be in, you know, under overhead power line, we allow for understory trees to be
sure.
planted instead of canopy trees, and you know, a lot of the times we require, you know, 2 understory trees in place of 1 canopy tree, just because they obviously don't cover as much area. But didn't know if y'all had any other ideas for how understory trees could be utilized in the landscape.
It's kind of what the site dictates, you know,
It does.
if it's, if a canopy tree is just not gonna fit, at maturity, then 2 understory trees is better
Mhm.
for all the environmental reasons, and I don't know if we can.
Put some of that into the ordinance, that
Yeah,
kind of
it's- depends on the-
site dependent.
Site dependent, right.
Okay,
I love the idea of the interplaying with native material and all that, but that's, I don't know, that might be a tough one to push.
well, I mean, we already focus on native plantings, and we have a recommended planting list,
Do we have that posted online?
I think so, I'm pretty sure we do.
I tried to look for it the other day and I couldn't
Is it
find it,
not?
because I told someone it was online, and then I was like, wait, is
I'm
it?
pretty sure it's on there.
It's on there, I
Okay.
can't tell you exactly where it's at, but it is on there.
Yeah.
But to require it, and not be too busy, that might be a chore, I don't know. It makes so much difference.
Well, you don't want to specify just native.
No,
Yeah, and on the required planting list, it certainly
No, that's
has
in the ordinance,
some,
right.
you know, naturalized
Right, yeah.
species, you know, so it's, but yeah, I mean, we still have, you know, when we review landscape plans, you know, Justin has to let them know, like, well, what, there's no need for you to plant these while they're native, no need for you to plant these red maples, because they're not gonna do very well. Or, you know, no, you can't plant ligustrum, that's a
yeah,
invasive species, so, you know, trying to keep up with that, we do have done a better job recently in reviewing the actual species selection. That doesn't mean they always plant the exact species that's on the list,
But we can try to work with them.
but we try and work with them to, if they can't find what's on the list, to find an alternative that's equivalent, that's not invasive. So, and that is at least naturalized to our area and isn't gonna die
Right.
very quickly, so.
And there's something about, plane installation in accordance with industry standards. Do y'all, is there something like that in here as well, when they do the actual planning?
So it does.
It's more to it than you see.
There it is. Is that more 87?
It's 871, I mean, it talks about staking and, accepted practices.
Like on the problem, landfill, the fabric bag, stuff like that.
Yeah, so all new plant materials shall be of good quality, installed in a sound workmanlike manner, and meet the standards set forth in the American Standard for Nursery stock by the American Association of Nurserymen.
Okay.
And yeah, I know Justin's told people that as well, like, hey, I can see you're still, this is still in the cage, yeah,
Yeah.
not gonna work.
That's right, that's right.
So that kind of gets caught at the inspection level.
Okay.
That would be one thing that I look for. And that kind of to go along with that, Jesse, I just had a comment about what I saw a lot this summer with trees planted in the summer were trees dying a couple weeks down the road and then having to have them replace the trees. I know there is talk of irrigation in there, which is 871I, but I didn't know if there should be some wording for supplemental irrigation, like ideally it'd be nice to see those tree diapers on them, but even tree bags, which are not a burden to add, I think you can buy those for $20 to $30, which.
And they're reusable.
Replacing a tree is, $500-600.
Right.
So I don't know if there should be wording in there. I've recommended it to people, developers where their trees they're replacing a tree a week.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there should be wording in there that ideally, ultimately, it would help them.
It would help them. 5-gallon buckets with holes punched in the bottom.
So,
I'm serious.
Yeah, something
that works.
irrigation,
Yeah.
some sort of
It's just-
supplemental.
Anything, anywhere better than no.
Right. Especially when it's 100 degrees and.
Yeah.
That's
And the wind's blowing.
Right.
Yeah, and I know we try to avoid having them plant in that time of year, if at all possible. I'm sure we have something regarding,
Where they can do a.
give them
bond.
180 days, a bond for 180 days, but I really don't want to go to the trouble of doing a bond and that sort of thing, so, see if there's anything. Yeah, performance bond or other improved surety. Give them 180 days. Anything else you wanna discuss, or?
I can't promise that I'll think of something.
Well, if y'all, this is certainly not the end of us discussing this at all, but, I think what we'll do is take what we've got here, get started on some research and try and do some drafting.
Where would you tell us to get ideas and see how other people are doing it? Greenville,
So, yeah, we just,
where somebody has a road.
yeah,
Ordinance.
areas, Charlotte, I know has good tree ordinance. Charlotte, Greenville, like I said, the city of Decatur, I know has a pretty good one in Georgia. Charleston, Mount Pleasant, just to look at what folks around the area do as well. So, Goose Creek, because the council will often ask us, well, does anybody else around here do this? Or are we the only ones who require this?
You already are in some respects.
So, and that's not always a bad thing,
No, it
obviously,
isn't.
but, and when it's something that may be more onerous, then they wanna make sure we're not, discouraging certain things. So, those are generally the places we'll look.
I know Greenville.
Rock Hill,
Savannah, maybe.
Savannah's
Yeah.
potentially good, but we generally try and stick with things that are in the southeast, obviously because of the climate and
Right, sure.
that sort of thing, so.
What is the exact process to submit the amendment to council?
So really, honestly, once we have a redlined copy of what we're proposing, it just goes to the planning commission for a public hearing and recommendation, and then it would go to council.
Okay.
Now, like I said, I would like to have some public input, so that's a process we're gonna have to figure out. Like I said, we'd probably ask some of those folks how they've done their public input as well, to get see if we can find some methods that work well, without a huge amount of time, involved, just because this is our staff, we don't have the capacity to do a huge amount of, time and effort in terms of getting that public input, but we would like to get that, so it's not something that folks feel that we just dropped on them. So.
Yeah.
But I think obviously the first part is doing the research and getting those proposed changes to be reviewed, before we can start that process. So, my goal, honestly, would be, by summer to try and get maybe this in front of council. I may be quicker than that, and may not, depending on, the feedback that we get, so. But like I said, if y'all have anything else that, pops in your head, or just shoot us an email, call us, whatever works best for y'all.
Yeah, because anything could happen on any one of our visits, could be something new that or wrinkles as well. We're trying to think of that, because it's never happened before.
That's true, very true.
Okay, we know where to find you.
Well, thank y'all very much.
Well, thank you.
Was good. Send us a copy of that first page as you were writing down there.
The first page is this is from today. This was just the previous stuff that we discussed.
Or the first page.
The first page?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not like it was back in.
Okay.
You got all your Christmas shopping done?
I'm going next. Not my first time. These are the last
Items to pick up.
Watch out for that.